Wives, are you reluctant to actually submit to your husband like you might know the Bible does say? Because there's a bunch of sticking points where it just feels wrong. Like you feel like it is bad for various reasons. There is so much feminist ideology, and feminism is not about like, oh, should women have bank accounts? We're well past that. Anyway, there's a lot of that ideology, and it holds you back from God's best. Because if you are a Christian, you believe that God's ways are the best ways. And so it is a blessing to you and your marriage and the world to be a biblical, submissive wife. But what does that mean? That's what we're going to talk about. There's 7 different kind of lies, misconceptions out there. I mean, I'm sure there's more too, but just these are some things that I noticed that I found in my comment section, basically, of my other video about some practical examples of how to submit to your husband. So my name is Allie, and I am a Christian, of course, because I'm talking about biblical femininity and everything. And I'm a wife. I've been married for over 10 years, and I am a homeschool mom of 3 going on 4 little girlies. So that is a little bit about me, and my channel talks about biblical femininity, relationships. I do call out those feminist ideologies that really hold us back. I believe it's important to identify those because I believe at a sort of subconscious level, even in the church, we're very affected by these things. And a lot of times they're straw man arguments and they're caricatures and of either God being awful or our husbands being some kind of monster to us, and that is not going to help you in your marriage. So if you're wanting to improve your marriage, or maybe you're not married, but you're just wanting to take in some information to help kind of prepare yourself mentally for what marriage is about, then I encourage you to watch this video. Or if you're just curious, it seems like a lot of people aren't Christians. They watch the videos anyway. So, you're welcome to do that as well. Do like this video if you like this kind of content. Subscribe if you want more of this sort of thing. I'll be honest, I'm so not consistent. This is not the priority of my life here. It has been a very long time since I made a video, but I try to sometimes get these out there. So number 1, I just want to point out that submission is not an excuse for abuse. So Mike Winger, he is a pastor who has a YouTube channel. I'm going to link a video of his where he talks about this because he has seen that these kind of verses can be used for abuse. And it's, well, submit to me, and so I'm going to do what I want with you. And it's not a good situation. But that's not who this video is for. This is not for somebody who is in an abusive relationship. If you are, I really recommend you find videos to help you deal with your situation, and make a plan for your life, for your safety and your kids' safety and all of that. So I just want to clarify, this is really for more somewhere in the realm of healthy relationships, the kind of people that I'm in Bible studies with, where, you can have a breakdown of your marriage, but it's not a situation of one person being really crazy towards another person, but it's like your husband, everybody's trying to be good people and we're trying to have a better marriage. Number 2, an idea that people struggle with is that if submission is hard, then it must be wrong. And so sometimes just the idea of, well, that's difficult to put down my interest and put to somebody else's interest or somebody else's perspective ahead of mine. I want to be right. I want to do it my way. That's hard to have that humility and to have that selflessness. It's difficult. But where in the Bible does it say if something is difficult, it's inherently bad? If anything, the Bible says the very opposite of the path is narrow, right? And so things like we have a sin nature. And so, yeah, submission probably is not going to be the easiest thing ever, right? It might be difficult. And I do want to make a note here in spouse selection, especially for people who are not yet married. because I believe our culture kind of encourages us to just sort of like, oh, do they like doing the same stuff as me? Do we have the same hobbies? Is he cute? Is he, whatever? But as Christians, we want to be looking at what the Bible says about marriage and then say, is this the kind of guy that I want to be submissive to? Is he somebody who I trust in his leadership? Do I believe he's going to lead us down a path of destruction? That I'm going to be constantly trying to persuade him otherwise? Or do I trust him, and does he love me? Does he have my best interest at heart? Things like that. So those are the kind of things you want to be thinking about before you marry somebody. And I recognize that that's really difficult if you're kind of past that. The third kind of misconception about submission is that somehow being submissive or submitting releases your value. And so I would point out that this is really more of that Marxist power struggle. It's all about you need to be dominating, and power is the same as worth. This is a very unbiblical concept. The Bible is so clear about God loving everyone. God chose just regular, ordinary fishermen to be apostles. It was not about who is powerful in society, who is the decision makers, who has the big influence. That is not what it's about. It was about he chose humble Mary, quiet Mary, just doing her thing, and to be the mother of Jesus. So I really want to encourage you to just check that and say, wait a second, am I confusing my value as a human being with my power for decision making and leadership and for the things that honestly sound, I want to use the word sexy, where it's like kind of like appealing, not, in really like a sexual way, but like where it's just kind of, there's something fun and appealing about being the leader and whatever. But remember, that is not really a biblical idea, that is just the ideal. And so I just want to encourage you all in that if you say, you know what, I'm going to put my husband's desires before mine, or his, way of doing something before mine, that doesn't mean that you're not worth something. Like, those are two different conversations. So I really want to encourage you in that. And that also encourage you that you are creating value. You are producing value to him as you are a helpmate. And when you're helping him and you're honoring him and you're respecting him, then that is like you're always valuable as a person in that like God, like unconditional love kind of way. But as far as just logistical, earthly value, like there's a whole lot of verses about virtuous women who are producing and doing good things. And it's much more about qualities in them, rather than how much money did you make? How, do you have bragging rights over this or that? It's not about that. And so you really, it'll be much easier for him to love you and value you and appreciate you when you are striving to add value to him and his life and to your family, and it's not to say that men don't sin. And so of course there are examples of, the wife who's like, well, I put everything in and then he left me, and and that's so awful. And that is so sad. And, God is perfect. Humans are not. And so there is that flesh nature. And so your husband has to deal with his own demons too. But living a godly way that's God honoring means you're storing up treasure in heaven. And so just because even if he doesn't appreciate you, God does appreciate you. So remember that, and to have that kind of eternal mindset, which is hard. I mean, it is kind of like to the earlier point, like just because it's hard doesn't mean it's wrong. There's a whole lot of things in the Bible, like love your enemies. That's not easy. And what you want is for your enemies to then turn around and be like, oh, I guess you're not that bad or whatever. But that doesn't always happen, So anyway, but if you are in a really difficult situation, I certainly encourage you to seek out individual support for your marriage. But that's just something to keep in mind, is that you are always valuable, no matter whether you decide to push your own interests or whether to push your own way of doing things or not. And I would kind of argue, if anything, you are being a more prizeworthy wife when you are putting other people's needs before yours. That doesn't mean don't have boundaries. There's a whole book about boundaries. It's actually written by Christians and talks about biblical support for boundaries. But just in general, having more of that selfless attitude, submissive attitude, is a virtuous thing, not a bad thing that loses your value. Number 4 is that submission is about gender roles. And like it's related. And this is not necessarily super biblical. This is just sort of my perspective on things. Is that it's kind of a different conversation about whether a woman is working or not. And the Bible does talk about being keepers at home and whatnot. But if we're talking about specifically submitting to your husband may want you to be working, right? And then also there's the issue of, because this stuff is not really taught in the churches, is mostly ignored, or even refuted, people don't plan for this stuff. So who knows what financial situation you're in, because you weren't coming into your marriage saying, okay, the plan is for me to be home with the kids when we have them, and that's plan A, and we can make a plan B, but that's plan A because that's biblical. A lot of people just kind of live their life, and then maybe you're however old, and then you're kind of noticing that this stuff is in the Bible, and you're like, well, what am I supposed to do? I would say that, submission is about following his leadership. So if he's telling you he wants you working, I would argue that is submitting. But then also it is intertwined in that a lot of times there's again back to that power look, like where women don't want to be at home, even if their husband does want them at home, because they're not making the money. They feel less in control and all of that. And then it kind of gets more into that kind of feminist, like, I'm going to be my own person, my independent person, which really is not a biblical concept. Even with widows, it really was, the families were supposed to help take care of them and all of that, which I'm not necessarily saying, there might be some aspect of, in different times had different results in how to do things. But I just want to point out that even if maybe you're not cooking, like maybe your husband does the cooking and you don't, you don't have to look like stereotypical gender roles just because that's tradition. So I do want to urge people to look at what the Bible is specifically saying, and not get too into, oh, well, wait a second, she's good at putting together the furniture. And, is that not submissive? It's like, you're your own team. And I do also want to point out, as far as looking at your spouse and you as a team, that a team, like if you do team activities, and kind of like leadership conference kind of stuff, there's always is that dynamic of who is the leader, but the other people are still on the team. So just because you're a team doesn't mean it's total equal, 50-50, you're both the head. No, like that's not the concept of a team. There's one point guard playing on the court at once in a basketball game, right? Or per team. You gotta have one person. And so, but how you distribute all of your different labor, that's whatever, that's your guys' call. And I encourage you to be submissive to your husband's leadership and how he's kind of seeing things. And that will kind of bring into my next point of number 5, that being submissive does not mean you're just silent and you just don't say anything. You just don't communicate anything and whatever. So a lot of times as you communicate, if you married somebody who has your same values, you have some similar thought processes, you probably are going to arrive at similar conclusions. And then a lot of the details is just little stuff, but you're trying to go the same place. and everything. So it doesn't mean you just don't say anything and he says he wants to do something and you know that it's a terrible idea. So, and then you're like, well, I'll just be submissive. You know, you got to watch that to say, am I trying to have like a spirit of submission, have an attitude of submission where I am willing to follow his leadership? Or am I almost trying to trap him and say, okay, well, I'll let you do whatever stupid thing you want to do, and then we'll see how it blows up in your face. You know, like if that's what you're doing, like that's not submitting and that's not storing up any reward in heaven. That's a problem. That's not a submissive attitude. If you're doing kind of the martyr thing where it's like, oh, poor me. And you're really kind of almost wanting that, sort of the right to wallow about how your husband, doesn't, I don't know, whatever. You want something and you can't get it because you're submitting, and if you're having basically a bad attitude about things, I kind of argue that, talk to God about these things and let the Holy Spirit or nudge you about like, are you having a good attitude or a bad attitude? And if it's kind of a bad attitude, even if technically you're submitting, I think that's sort of the kind of verses where the Bible talks about religion not necessarily being good, like the religious acts. If it's just out of this, it's like pure religion is taking care of the orphans and whatever, like actually doing stuff and actually having that heart of love, and not about just technically following what you're supposed to do. Number 6 is that submitting is being just not fun. That's something that I saw, which I thought was kind of silly because, again, it's sort of similar to the value thing. Like that's just a whole different realm. I mean, to me anyway, fun would be, being adventurous or this or that, being able to laugh and whatever, not power struggle. And I suspect that maybe some of this almost comes from sort of Hollywood, where they kind of do this portrayal of the people who really are, arguing all the time. Well, that person's challenging them and that's passion. And that's, that's the real love where you have that real connection when you're constantly challenging each other, and they even sometimes portray it in this kind of argumentative way. And I don't know. I mean, I would maybe argue that is just an unhealthy relationship. And then because it's Hollywood and it's attractive people or whatever, and they get to write the storyline, it's like, that's love. But I mean, nowhere in the Bible does it say arguing with somebody is love or something like that. And fun just has to do with like, are you doing fun things? And if anything, it seems like if you're submissive, you'd be more willing to try some new things and do stuff that's a little out of your comfort zone and kind of say, okay, you know what? I'm going to, if you're interested in doing that, like, I guess I'll try, and that would be a submissive attitude, which I would think would actually lead to more fun. Okay. Number 7, I kind of started talking about this in a different point, but it's that there's this idea sometimes that submission is just all about decision making and power. And anyway, this is kind of my understanding of it. And I would definitely encourage you to look up pastors, who've been to seminary and whatever, talking about the biblical view of this. But my take is that it is more about that attitude of submission, that willingness to submit. And so it's more about being kind of a peaceful wife, not having that power struggle, just appreciating what people are doing. It's more about that and not about, the decisions. Comment with your greatest takeaway, or maybe share whatever kind of myths might hold you back or whatever, your kind of take on submission. All right. Like this video if you liked it and subscribe if you want more of this kind of content. All right. Have a good day. Bye.